Might as well, because you never know what exciting things we may derive as we go through the process. So, all right, let me share my screen. Okay, so I'll kind of review with you what I've been working on in terms of a book project, and then I'll kind of deconstruct the pieces that I have developed. First and foremost, as noted, this is a session for my patrons, aka those who are giving me a monthly contribution to help me pay for my Tinderbox addiction. So thank you, and all the toys that come along with fulfilling that need. So thank you very much for your support, guys. I really appreciate it. It's not it doesn't go unnoticed. So what I've been doing over the last 3 weeks or so is actually it's been about 6 months, but in earnest about 3 weeks ago, I sat down to write a book, or I sat down to write a report for a client, based on some interviews and some market assessment that they had asked me to work on for them. And uh, unbelievably, that project actually, because of the frankly, and I do believe this to be true, because of the facility of the way Tinderbox has taught me to write and analyze and think, I was able to go from the expectation of like a 8 to 10,000 word report to writing, let me see where I'm at right now, a 37,000 word book in 3 weeks. And I really think that is primarily because of the tool itself, and the facilities that tool brings to bear. So if I kind of go through that at a high level, you'll see what, essentially here's the whole book. And again, we're not going to go into this session to reviewing, everything that how all of these pieces come together. But, essentially this is the 37,000 word book that I was able to write in 3 weeks because I've got this tool. And part of the key points of this session is to talk about creating indexes and glossaries from this type of work. And you'll see what I've been doing is, let me go down here and I'll show you a section. So like, for example, this book is about essentially defining the terms and understanding the personal data and identity marketplace. And so then you'll see, and you can actually see it in real time. Let me just finish this up to show you right here. So for example, I was writing this morning about how when you're in the industry, you need to treat this concept of an individual properly. And an individual, and to show you the definition of an individual, the individual is someone refers to, that the society, individual refers to any legally recognized sovereign entity, which includes a human beings or public private institutions, et cetera, et cetera. And then as I was kind of going through my work, I'm realizing, well, you know what, there's this actual special class of an individual. One important thing to remember is that the individuals that are children, mentally challenged, physically challenged, elderly, students, employees, or, renters, the incapacitated, et cetera, very well may have special laws and regulations. Organizations may have special laws and regulations that they'd have to adhere to when interacting with those special class of people. So as I'm going through doing this kind of work, what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, let me start defining those terms. So I'm going to put up the term elderly. I'm going to put up the term children, the incapacitated. And what Tinderbox will do for me is using my my linking scripts, will go in and say, okay, I'm going to go create a note, if it doesn't already exist, for the term children and stick that in Tinderbox. And then I can then go to find it. I'm going to go create a note for the entity that is the Child Online Protection Act. And then that way, then I can go ahead and, mouse over this, pull this out, quickly define that term, and I can go ahead and give it an acronym. COPA, is a United States regulation for protecting individuals under the age of 13. Okay. And so then I'm able to define that term, and then I can move on. And then later when I reference that term, I've got it in my file as this asset that I can refer to later. And what's really nice about that, if I ever now want to, if I'm writing another article in the future and I want to refer to the term, to the Child Online Protection Act, I don't have to do that work again because I've already done it. So if that makes sense. Now, one of the things I need to talk to Mark about is, because my file is getting so large, and there's a lot going on. I've got over 3,000 notes and about 1,900 links and tons of action code that's running in the background. I've got almost 4,000 rules that are being run right now dynamically in the background. This is performing as quickly as I'd like. So for example, I've added these terms about a minute or so ago, and the impatient part of me wants these links to instantaneously appear. Even though I'm on an M1 Mac, it could take a minute or two for Tinderbox to go through every single note, process all the links, and put all of those pieces together. But
yeah, I'm feeling that pain a lot with some of the stuff I'm doing right now too. So.
Right. So, and I do want to talk to Mark about that, because I feel like there's got to be something in my code that I can do that would make the solution be a little bit more performant. But but you get the idea then. So the point being is, as I'm doing my writing, I want to stay focused in what I'm writing and working on. So I write about my concepts, and if I come up with terms or references or entities or other things that are related to this particular piece of material that I'm working on, I'll add in terms or entities or other related information. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now what I'll show you how that then manifests itself out in other aspects of the document. So down here, you'll see I've got 3 agents that are running: glossary, terms, index of entities, and index of figures. And what I have doing here, and this is where it gets super, super interesting. So let me just kind of walk through this step by step and show you what I'm doing and what's happening. So you'll see here I've got my set agent dot contains name. So this is the one of the key steps here. So I'm saying, what this is saying is, hey, Tinderbox, go out and interrogate this agent's my set attribute, and then go find every note that has the essentially the name, or that is in my set. So and so let me pause right there just to kind of demonstrate that, and I'll show you how I'm doing it. So there's a note called term attitudinal data. And so Tinderbox is going to go out and find any note that is the name attitudinal data, and bring that back. And the reason why I'm doing that is, if you recall from some of the other work I've been doing, I've gotten really zeroed in on making sure that all of the, especially those areas that I have resources like terms and companies, entities, etc. They're all going to have unique names. So I know within this large file that there isn't going to be any other note named term attitudinal data. All right, that's one of the important considerations that I do, is that I make sure that that term is unique into itself. Now, how am I getting Tinderbox to produce or to do that? So in the rule for this agent, I'm essentially telling Tinderbox, and again, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So this rule or this agent is under the project of this book, of this item. So what I'm essentially telling Tinderbox is, in its rule, go and let me kind of pause real quick. What I want, let me start with what I want to accomplish. What I want is, I want Tinderbox to say, go find the use of any term within this project, within this note. And so what you'll see here, I'm first setting an ID number for V project, for variable project. And what I'm saying is, hey, Tinderbox, first, let's set the ID number of the project I'm working on. So, the parent of this agent is this note here. Now, I could have said, name, but what I found is as I write a lot, I'll be changing this name all the time as I'm refining my my work. And so therefore I need to zero in on something that's guaranteed not to change. And what's never going to change is the ID number of the note. So I'm basically telling the agent to say, go and get the ID number of the parent for this project, which is the that particular note. And then I say, okay, clear out your set, clear out your terms. And then I say, go collect the terms for every note in that project. And then, so that makes sense? And then to make sure that I'm looking for unique notes with that unique name, I then say, okay, then set the, then look at the agent's term note and append the prefix term to that term, and then populate the attribute my set. So what that does, so let's take a step back. So the objective at this beginning is have the glossary term, get a glossary of terms that's created for all of the terms that have been used in every single note within this particular project. So again, if I go back here to the individual one here, understanding the actors, as I'm writing, I'm saying, okay, for this particular piece of writing, the term marketplace, personal data, and identity marketplace are important terms that I'm going to want to end up in a glossary somewhere, or that I need to define for this particular project or work I'm working on. So let's go ahead and you'll see that these get linked. So let's go ahead and put those there. So if I go down to my glossary, basically what this is saying is, go collect all of the uses, all of the information that's in the attribute term throughout the project, and then create me a set so I have a set of unique names. Let me pause there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're in your set, you're merely putting together a list of names.
I'm putting the list of names of unique notes.
Okay. Do those notes exist yet or not?
Well, they do, because if you go back here, if you go back to the very beginning point here, marketplace actors, my create and link note with prefix action code, my function. And let me show you that function. So in my notes, and again, I don't do this with everything in a document, but in my writing notes and essentially what I call my my sectional notes, when I'm writing, if I put a value in this this note set, that triggers this function. You'll see it says term resources terms this, and let me show you that function. What that's doing in that function, where is it? Library. So what that function does is it says, basically take the inputs from the note and go create that note in the specified directory if it doesn't exist. And if it does, and then once it's created, or if it already exists, then link it to this note. So this function, and again, this is a really important aspect of my writing, because as I write, I want, in a kind of Lumen-esque Zettelkasten approach, what I want is to deconstruct my thinking to those atomic pieces. And those atomic pieces are often companies, entities, concepts, laws, regulations, those things that are specifications in your world, Chuck. So those things that are super concrete and atomic and important to me. So if I go back to that understanding the individual, wrapping one's head around it, classifying individuals. Yeah, and I got to figure out why this is not processed yet. Again, I got to talk to Mark because this is taking longer than it should. But you'll see here that I put up the term children here in this note that automatically created this note. And so therefore I can start editing it. And again, let me see if I can figure out, there's sometimes I've got something wrong. Let me reset this rule just to make sure that is the correct rule. And because I don't know why the elderly item, other than the fact, as I mentioned before, Tinderbox is just dutifully churning through the 2,000 rules that I'm asking it to do, and they at this point probably 4 or 5 million processes to get it done. But eventually these will show up. And again, I'll ask Mark to help me figure out how to make it more performant. But to your point, Chuck, yes, those notes automatically get created when I put this term here. And then if I scroll down, you'll see I've got a terms directory where those notes are getting created.
Right. So that's I guess what wasn't sure about. So in your glossary, you were creating that set and you were appending the term prefix to them. And I wasn't sure if you already had the notes. I wasn't sure I understood the reason you were appending that TRM hyphen prefix.
Well, because I need to append the term TRB hyphen so that the agent knows what to go find.
Okay. So you're now creating from a list where you get the term itself, you're then extrapolating and creating the corresponding note name that goes with that term.
Correct.
So that you can then look it up. All right, I got that then.
So that I can go look it up. All right, you got it.
I'm doing some very similar things. So yeah.
Okay. So that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I just wasn't sure which way you were going there.
So that's yeah, so that's how that process starts. So I'm doing my writing. I'm associating my articles with a particular term or a note or an idea. I'm defining that stuff. That process is creating those notes. It's allowing me to incrementally refine my thinking. And then I get down to here and I'm like, okay, I now want to create a glossary for this document I've just been working on.
Right. So the glossary is generating the names that you need to use to fill in the glossary.
Correct. And so now let me take it to the next step. Now this is where it gets super fun. So Deb, does that make sense so far? Conceptually?
Conceptually, yes.
Yeah. I mean, step by step. I mean, it's like one of those things you can't tell someone to go ride a bike. They've got to go get on the bike to actually ride the bike, right?
Yeah.
And believe me, I've been falling down and skinning my knees and putting on my little helmets. Just it's been scary. It's like at sometimes. So then what you do is so essentially that whole preamble that we were just talking about, what that does is basically generates this found list.
Okay.
Right. So essentially I've got 70, so out of this, for lack of a better focus, out of this 37,000 word book that I've written, there are 77 really important terms, which by itself in the concept of writing really kind of gives me pause, right? Because I've essentially had to write 77,000 words or 37,000 words to zero in on 77 really important concepts, right? Which,
well, are they concepts or are they terms?
Well, they're terms. Well, define what a term means. Concepts, terms, regulations, and in this particular use case right now, they're concepts, they're terms. Like, so for me, the term of attitudinal data or attribute data, or the concept or term of a child or children, right? In the process of me doing my writing, these are things that became important to me. Right. The term data broker, for instance, is a type of enterprise. A data broker participates in the commercial collection and exchange of personal data. It's a really important concept in the marketplace of personal data and identity. So do you call it a term? Do you call it a concept? For now, I'm just calling it terms.
Okay.
Right. But a data broker is also a, you know, and here's the difference. The data broker is the concept of an enterprise. And then you'll have companies who are data brokers, which is now an entity. So the entity, say Experian, is a company or is an enterprise that is associated with the term data broker, right? And so later I can do the linking between those concepts, and, you know, between the concept data broker and the enterprise that is Experian later.
Right.
Okay. So that's what I'm doing. So that gets me my list of those important terms that I'm using in my document that I want to have be in my glossary. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Now what's going to happen? Now,
well, and just to add, your list there is also giving you the index of the actual IDs for those.
That's the next
term
step.
Notes. Okay.
That's the next step. We haven't built that yet. Right. In the conversation we're having right now, we haven't built that yet. So far, all I've done, so it's taken us basically 22 minutes for me to explain what my project is, what I'm doing, how I'm creating those note terms, how I'm defining those terms, and how I am getting to how I'm getting my document to find those notes. So now let's take it to the next step. Now what I want to be able to do is in the form of a glossary. Essentially what the glossary is here's the term, here's this definition, right? So that's what a glossary is. So how do we do that, right? And that's, again, the really important point. Why do I need to create the individual notes for like children or capital data? Well, because I want those definitions to show up in my glossary, right? I don't want to have I want someone to have to go into the book to find the term. I want them to go to the glossary to find the definition. So what do we do now? So what we do now is, and again, you can do this in other ways. So for example, there's a number of different ways to do this. Because of the way I'm constructing my whole book. And remember, this is not just about, you know, if you recall my 5 C's of knowledge management: collection, curation, contribution, collection, curation, creation, contribution, and collaboration. I use Tinderbox for publishing, right? So that contribution part is huge. And I have a massive strategy. So when I go ahead like this and I say, okay, here's my document. My entire document is written in Markdown. I now want to then go public, you know, so here's my entire document that's written in Markdown. I'm now going to go and, create a draft of that document. And then when
Michael, you are awesome. The draft is ready.
So, and then I have Tinderbox give me attribution when I've created my draft. What that does is that step converts my Markdown to HTML. What it also does, because I'm using Pandoc in the background, is it generates all of my citations, right? So here are all of the citations for my entire document inserted in either Chicago or an APA style. So then what I can do is, now that I've got everything wrapped up into one file, packaged up nicely, all organized with appropriate citations, and I'll give you some examples of, like, here you'll see somewhere where there's a citation showing up, that it will be in line within the text in this, I think, oh yeah. So here I'm saying, and this just got built using APA. So there's the APA reference. If I had happened to do it with Chicago, you'll see here, let me go up here to my draft. And instead, what I can do here is I can go ahead and I'm still tweaking it a little bit, but if I go here and I say, I don't want you to use APA, but rather I want you to use Chicago, right? So now I'm telling Pandoc, don't process my citations with APA, process my citations with Chicago. So now if you go through here, rather than seeing the inline citation, what you're going to see is Chicago styled footnotes. And now if I drop down to the end of the document, there are my Chicago entry footnotes plus the reference. So it's wickedly cool. But again, that's not what we're doing right now for the next 30 minutes. But you kind of, so this is my ultimate goal. Package up all of the notes that I've gotten, stick them into a common document, and then publish them out with the references at the end. Okay. And then because I'm the way I'm doing Tinderbox, I can then push it out as an HTML document. I can push it out because I'm using Pandoc. I can push it out as a Word document. I can push it out as a PDF. You know, any output I want is, you know, available to me now. Mm-hmm. Okay. So going back to what we're doing here. So essentially we're focusing on the glossary. So what I wanted, and again, because the reason why I wanted to show you the complete thing, because I'm compiling everything all into one piece, and I have a really intricate markdown template that I've used. Here, if you look at my markdown template, I have a really intricate markdown template that basically says, you know, if you're heading 1, then format yourself this way. If you're heading 2, format yourself this way. If you're heading 5, format yourself this way. And partly that's because I'm, you know, the dictations from my the academia, you know, APA style wants heading 5s to be done exactly this way. So I've created myself a markdown template that matches that. And then if you're an image, do this. If you're a quote, do that. And so I've got a fairly intricate markdown template I've built, so that when I go up here at the parent level, and I say, interrogate all of your children and populate and format your document, it's happening all automatically, right? And so therefore, in order to get my, you know, and so that was a preamble to say, I can't just have Tinderbox go out on the side to create my table. I need to have Tinderbox internally within the node itself generate my table. And so therefore, what I'm doing, that's what's happening here in this code. And what I've also done as a little affordance is I've assigned the P agent prototype to my glossary. And then what I've also done is I've assigned to the P agent prototype. Let me go, come on. To the P agent prototype itself, I assigned the new action prototype, because you can assign a prototype to a prototype. What then, why that's important is then that allows me to write, why that's important is that allows me to write action code in the body of my agent text. And so, for example, if I start writing you know, if I go in here and I say comma, you know, related words, it will actually look up the action code and will look up my attributes for me, and it'll, you know, in the node itself, unlike in functions and things. So that allows me to, it makes it easier for me to write my action code. So now let me explain what's happening here. So I need to have Tinderbox go build a table for me. And that table is essentially grab all the attributes, grab all the definition. I'll explain this in a minute. This is a little bit more complex. And so what I'm saying is, hey, Tinderbox, clear out my string, clear out my list so that we're getting clean and started. Now what I want you to do is build a list of the IDs from what you found. So go collect all the children and grab the ID notes for the notes that are currently in the glossary. Then for every item in your list, I want you to start building my table. So essentially in my string, and this is critical, this plus equals. So what I'm saying is in my string plus equals. So for every item, I need you to build me a row, table data, and then grab the short title for that note. And the short title is basically attitudinal data. I have an attribute called short table that trims off the prefix. And so, and then I say, so that's your first cell. Then your second cell, and this took me a while to figure out, and I needed Mark Anderson's help with it, where you said I used go grab me the exported string for that term, and then render that exported string with a using a template called trender, which essentially what that does is, if you look at my notes here, you'll see my note says, v short title blah blah blah. And the reason why I say v short title is because sometimes I change the name of the term, and so I always want the definition to be in sync with the name of the term, especially again because I'm spelling challenged. If I spelled the term wrong, I don't want to have to go then play this game of whack-a-mole to find every place where I've introduced that spelling error. So I have the short title using export code get automatically inserted into the note. So that way, this reference in the note reference, attribute data will always be accurate. That's another kind of thing I've just done. And that's it. And if you're a great speller, you don't have to do that. But for me, I make errors all the time. So that it's a way of having Tinderbox protect me from me. So, yep. Can you not hear me, or Chuck, you got an issue, or what's happening?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear us, Chuck, or no? You good? Chuck. Sorry, Deb. Let's wait for Chuck to respond. I think Chuck has lost his audio. It would be my guess. Chuck, we can hear you. Okay, Chuck, can you speak?
Yes, I can speak.
All right, we can hear you.
You can hear me, huh?
Yeah, so it's on your end. On Zoom, how about this? On Zoom, change your speaker. So on Chuck, on where's he? Next to the mic.
I've just switched to the speaker on the
Yeah,
system.
got it. Okay. All right. So what you're seeing here is, so I'm saying go collect all the children IDs. And when I first did this, I did this. You're seeing the fourth iteration of this, right? When I first did this, I created this long thing, go collect the name and collect this and splice it together and all of that. It wasn't until about 3 weeks in that I realized, okay, I'm being an idiot. I'm making this too complex. I should just work with IDs. So I'll go collect the IDs and then so fill in the short title. Yeah, and again, the reason why I'm doing exported data, if I just did text, what I would get back is the text, but without this being processed, right? And so therefore I get, value, short title, blah, blah, blah. I get the export code. So by me using the command export string and having it render, and the template rendering the exported string, essentially before Tinderbox inserts the definition into the table, it's processing the note and inserting the name into that variable. And then and then let's ignore this piece right here for now. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And so then what Tinderbox does is it goes through and builds row by row for every one of the terms, the value of my string, and then down here. And so so I'm having action code triggered in the note name itself to then say, okay, when you're done doing that, Tinderbox, take the value of my string, that giant block of HTML text that you've just generated, and that's all in this. and stick it right here. And so what this is doing is it's giving me all the tables. Now down here, I need to tell Tinderbox, well, what are you going to do with it? Well, I want you to wrap a table around that. And I want you to put the first row of the table to be term, definition, and then section index, which I'll explain in just a second. So when I do that, voila, Tinderbox automatically adds the first row and then has processed every single individual term and stuck in its short title and its description. Make sense? Okay, now here's the fun part that Mark Anderson and I figured out earlier in the week, because I was working with my client and initially all I had was this. And then my client said, well, can I know where in the document you made that reference? So that's the section index. And I realized, well, you know, actually I can, because I know the note. I can find the note that referenced that term. And if I could find the note that referenced that term, I could then use internal anchor tagging of HTML to insert a link to that reference term. So look what happens here. And let me show you an example of that in a dummy file, because I don't want to waste our time generating the file. So here's a dummy file of this process. And so if I go like this and I generate the whole document, you'll see blah, blah, blah. Here's my whole document. And then down here on the bottom, it's created the index notes. You see that? Right? So if I click on it, it pops me up to note 1. Whoops. If I scroll down, and you'll see here, the term wicked is showing up in 2 notes, note 1 and note 2. So if I click here, it pops me to note 2. If I scroll down, if I click here, it pops me to note 1. Right? So essentially, I've created an interactive index of all of the terms to the entire document. And let me show you in the smaller document how I did that, and then I'll go back to the main document. So how that works is, again, same different document, same concept, is essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, go out and let me show you that the key elements here. First and foremost, what I'm asking Tinderbox to do is to go in, and here it says, let me start with this. What I had to do first is I had to tell Tinderbox, just like I had to tell Tinderbox to tell me what notes I had to find, I now had to have Tinderbox go get all the cross references. So first I say, Tinderbox, go grab the cross reference term for all of the children. So in each of my term notes, I have action code that's generating a cross reference, where I'm basically saying, Tinderbox, create a cross reference for each, no, that's wrong. No, I'm not doing it there. What I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, go collect the cross reference for each of the children. And I'm getting the cross reference for each of the children this way. But I'm saying, because I've linked note 1 to that term. Okay, you see that? Because I've linked note 1 to this term, privacy, identity, and wicked, I'm saying, Tinderbox, go cross-reference term equals links.inbound term ID. So basically populate the cross references for note 1 with the notes that I've linked to with the ID number. Does that make sense? So I'm basically saying I've linked note 1 to these terms, and these terms, the ID number for those terms are going to be populated in the attribute cross-reference. So now I have the ID numbers of the notes that are linked to this note. Okay. Then once I have the cross-reference, I'm then saying, hey, Tinderbox, go create the note IDs for every note in this article. And again, if in the future, just so you know, I'm gonna change the term article to project, because it doesn't have to be an article. It could be a book. It could be a presentation. So article is the wrong word. It should be project, right? So go create collect if descendants from the project ID, all of the IDs. And so essentially the two things I've got now, I've got all of the notes, all of the cross-reference notes for all of that are within the glossary, and I have all of the notes IDs for the project. Now I'm saying Tinderbox index to item. Index to item equals article notes dot intersect cross-reference terms. So what that's doing is saying compare the notes that are cross-referenced to the notes that are in this particular project, and those are the items that I want to index in my glossary. Now let me pause here. Why did I do this? The reason why I did this is if you look in my document, unlike I write because I've got terms and I've got entities and I've got a lot of like fundamental resource concepts that I have in my particular Tinderbox. I might write 4 or 5 or 6, articles in one Tinderbox file, or in this kind of what I'm working on right now, I'm writing 2 books in one file. And so what's important is if I look, so for example, if I go down to the term wicked, you'll see the term wicked is actually cross-referenced into 1, 2, 3, 4 different notes. But if you look at this, look at note 89, note 18, note 61, note 58. Here's note 58, here's note 61. Well, where's note 89? 89 and 88. So the term wicked is actually referenced in 2 different books, in Article 3 and in Article 1, right? Well, I don't want my glossary in Article 1 to have references from Article 3. Does that make sense? Right? So, because what I found when I first did this, because I hadn't thought of that situation, when I generated my glossary was generating and creating an index for wherever that term was used. And so I was getting Article 1 indexing and Article 2 indexing. So by doing this intersection element here, what I'm doing is I'm interrogating all of the uses of all of the notes where the term wicked is used, and then I'm indexing them only to the use of the term wicked in this article. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's what I'm getting here. So I'm getting cross-reference, article notes, items to index. So now that I've got my items to index, okay, so now that I've got my items to index, what I'm telling Tinderbox to do is go create a, I've got a term vlist. Oh, I've stopped using that actually. Yeah, let me show you here. This is going to be cleaner because I've stopped using this term. This one. Yeah. Okay. So like an appendix. No. Okay. VList count. Where am I defining VList? You're seeing some archive stuff that I don't do anymore. I don't necessarily need my number. Okay, so ignore this. I don't need that count anymore because I'm doing it differently. So now when I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, now go create a new list called my list to cross-reference.x.intersect items to index. So essentially I'm getting all of the items that I need to index. And then I'm saying Tinderbox, from my list to, for each item in my list to, do exactly what you did up here, and go create a list of indexed links. And if you notice here, so there's two nested dot each things. So this first outline dot each nest is doing the whole table, and then this dot nest link is building essentially a list with inside the table in that particular cell. So this dot nest is building this list in this cell here, whereas the first nesting of each link loop is building the whole table. And so then what I'm saying is for each item in cross-reference, or in the cross-reference attribute for each item in the list, go ahead and do an ahref anchor for the ID number of that note's ID. And then what I want you to do is also, and then get the name, and then use the anchor tag, get the name of the note for that note ID. And again, this is critical in Tinderbox language. If I say $name Y, what's happening here is that saying, go get the name for Y. Well, what is Y? Well, Y is the ID name of a note. And so Tinderbox now knows, go get for the note with the ID number X, or for Y, go get its name. Right. And so essentially what I'm doing then is I'm building a hypertext link that is linking to the notes. And then this is the critical element here. It says, if you are the last item, if you're not the last item, put a comma after your entry. And if you are the last item, then don't. And so what that does is that allows me to build a list without a comma being at the end. Right. Otherwise, if I didn't have that if statement, there would be a comma at the end, and that would be really irritating. Okay. So that's how I'm building that list. And again, if I weren't doing this intersect, I would get a list of indexes for every use of that term across my entire Tinderbox file, as opposed to just within this particular project or item. Okay, you with me so far? Okay. So one other critical piece that I haven't explained is how does this, so essentially what you've seen here, and again, here's a little affordance. If I copy this link, so I've just shown you how I'm generating that link. So if I copy that link and I open up drafts, here's my drafts file, you'll see what that link is doing is it's basically saying, here's the link, pound HTML. And now in HTML language, a pound in front of a number in a link item is an anchor for an internal link as opposed to an external link out to the internet. So what I do there is I go down to my template, and you'll see here throughout my document, I say anchor tag ID equals the value ID of the note. And that essentially what this HTML does is it creates that anchor in the document template. So if I go look now at the export code here, you'll see throughout my document are the anchor notes. You know, anchor ID, that item number. And if I scroll down, anchor ID, that note number. So every note is getting its anchor ID placed into the HTML. And then if you see down here, you'll see the table here where it says here, ahref, that note. And so that's how those two pieces are coming together. I'm inserting in the HTML the anchor ID up earlier in the document. So when the link adds in the link to that anchor, that's how those two pieces are connecting together. So when I do that, now I've shown you how the entire process works. Tinderbox goes through, it finds all of the terms used in the glossary. It then identifies the note IDs for all the terms used in the glossary. It identifies the notes used only in that particular note from the intersections, and it then generates the links internally within that document to go find those notes. And so now I can be clicking around to my heart's content from the glossary. And that is the end run complete explanation of what's going on here. Can't hear you, Chuck. Can't hear you. So Deb, what do you think?
I see huge amounts of potential here. I am not ready to implement it, but it is pretty darn exciting.
Well, the thing about it too is I'm working on making it, refining it. Like that's why I put in the project IDs, because earlier I had hard coded the numbers for the project here, and then I realized by doing that, both for myself because I'll forget, but also for if I give someone like you guys my code, you're not gonna remember to edit that, right? So if I give you the template, you'll be able to use the template without actually knowing the inner workings or having to know the inner workings until you're ready.
Cool.
All right, that's what
Yeah.
I'm working on building right now.
Yeah. But
Okay.
I write books and I often write articles simultaneously, and I end up with a single word that has multiple definitions. So I'm starting to think about, okay, if I have multiple definitions coming from different places for a given word, yeah, that's going to work here.
Well, and that's why I did it, because what I was finding, like in my doctoral dissertation, I was defining my primary term like 5 different ways in 5 different places, and my chair was getting after me. She's like, be accurate. And I was getting all of this inconsistency. And so that's why I did this process, because that way I always know my core terms are always in one place. They're never in multiple places. And if I want to derivate from them, I have to consciously do it, create it version 2 of that term.
Right. Yeah. And
right?
In my case, I'm working with something where there are multiple definitions.
Correct. And so then you have version 1, version 2, version 3, but now you're consciously doing it.
Right. Well, and I also have a way to bring them together.
Correct.
And look at them in comparison with
Correct.
each other.
Because then you can do an include within your document. It says, give me version 1, 2, 3 of those terms.
Yeah. And tell me where they came from.
And tell me where they came from. And then let me write an article around those as why they're different.
Yep. Bingo.
Right?
Yeah.
Freaking cool.
Yeah.
Right. So and I don't know what your work is, but imagine like if you're analyzing 5 different authors who've created 5 different uses of that term, you then could start intellectually thinking, well, I think so-and-so did it for this reason. And I think so-and-so did it for that reason.
Yep.
And you can have a really intellectual, from a philosophy perspective, it could be amazing.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing there. So Chuck, do we have your voice back? No, we still don't have your voice. Okay, so while we're waiting for Chuck to come back, let me go back and so as they say, necessity is the greatest source of innovation. The reason why I did this is my client at the beginning of the week said, hey, would it be nice if you could actually show me where in the document that term was used? So then I started doing that. Now, here's an interesting thing. What I have found is like the term cryptography, I actually used it somewhere, but didn't actually link it. And so somewhere, and this is, so I'm finding inconsistencies in my own structure. So somewhere in my document, I've used the term cryptography, and that's making its way into the glossary, but I don't really know why that's happening or where that's happening. So this is teaching me one of 2 things. One, somehow this is sneaking its way in, and I'm not sure. And I can figure out why, but most importantly, what it's telling me is somehow in my thought processes, this term was important to me, but I've not really officially linked it somewhere into my document. Right. So it's both a failure in my thinking, but it's also somewhat of a failure in my process, because somewhere in this mess of linking across literally hundreds of notes, that term is sneaking its way in, and it's clearly important. So it's telling me to go figure it out, which I will.
Yeah, it's a fail-safe in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing too is it tells me what terms I've not defined.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gone through and I found myself defining terms or making sure I'm linking to other ones. Now, here's the other really cool thing that I figured out, which is and I by the way, I do think I think the reason why this is happening is now that I think about it, and you guys are helping me talk it through, I also have generated, using the same method, an index of entities and an index of figures. I think like this is sneaking in because I have the use of the term issuer on a figure, but my index is not indexing figures. This index is indexing terms. So I think in my code, I'll figure that out. So let me show you, I did that exact same method, but rather than using terms, so in my section of like industry directory, I went through and I said, rather than using the term, I'm using the item of entity. And so, so here's the entity luminal, right? And actually, while I'm at it, I'll just go ahead and put this one up here because this should be here. Here's the entity. Because I've typed in the entity International Association of Privacy Professionals in here, what that's going to do is go add that to my entities directory. So if I go here, exact same process, but now I have, rather than doing terms, I have Tinderbox going through and grabbing me a list of every single company or initiative or entity that I've referenced within my book and where they're showing up in the book. So in this case, China's Personal Information Protection Law is showing up in the article, China's Personal Information Protection Law. Compliant Z is showing up in the initiative Global Privacy Control. Right? So now I have an index, just like I had an index of terms, I now have an index of entities. Okay? Now, here's the last thing in our last 90 seconds for this scheduled session. Let me show you what I did here. Index of figures. Now, this one works slightly differently in that I don't need, the search query is go to the project and get all of the items that are media, that are prototype media, right? So here are all of the figures in my document. And then what I do is in the media prototype, what I'm saying is create a cross-reference of the caption label plus the item number plus the caption. Okay, and I want the cross-reference item to be parent. So to be able to create an anchoring linking I was showing before, the images always are underneath a particular parent note. So if I scroll up here, you'll see wherever I'm doing, like this Lee Suker is underneath that abstract. You'll see this figure is underneath Identisphere. So create to get the cross reference, grab the parent above that image, and then this is the critical part. I've created a user generated attribute called outline order original and outline order original. So the outline order of this note, stick it into this attribute I called outline order. So what's going to happen here is I'm telling Tinderbox, first, go and find all of the images in the document, then sort the document by the original outline order number. Because if I just use outline order, because aliases have their own outline order. So I need the outline order of the original note, not the alias note of the image. And so now I get a sorted list of all of the images as to where they show up in the outline of my document. Then the next thing I do is I say, hey, agent, perform an action on these images. Create an outline order original equals the outline order original. So we did that. And then I say, make the caption number equal to the sibling order. So what's happening here is I'm telling Tinderbox to say, now that I've got the order of the images as they show up in the outline of my document, I now want you dynamically on the fly to number the images 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I do now is Tinderbox has now created my figure numbering. So now my numbers or my figures are always going to be correct. So when I go then and I look at the World Bank item number, its figure number is 47. And if I put that image in a different document, its figure number is going to be different because it's in a different outline order within that particular article. And I don't really care about the figure number until I go to publishing. And so it doesn't matter if that figure is in multiple different documents, because the number will get calculated dynamically when I publish the document. And so therefore it's always going to be accurate. Right? So now essentially what I've done is I now have in my indexing, I've got an index of terms, I've got an index of entries, and I now have an index of figures also with the link to where that figure shows up in the document. And that is our 3-minute over lesson on doing indexing and figure numbering in a Tinderbox file. And particularly in a Tinderbox file where you're writing multiple documents in one document, leveraging a common resource library of quote, and I do, and by the way, I do the same thing for quotes. We can have a whole other session too on how I treat and handle quotes. So when I get a really cool quote, I create the quote, I put in its citation key. I then can have Tinderbox actually process that citation key. So I'll show you in my markup, preview markup. And so here's an example of that quote. A good one. I'm applying a different template, but essentially what Tinderbox is going to go through is when this renders, it will actually give me the citation reference for that document, just like I showed you earlier. So I do that same concept. So as I've been doing through my work, what I've zeroed in on is there's some core references that pan across all of my projects, including things like quotes, themes, terms, people, entities, locations, etc. And so this becomes a common resource that I then can use and cross-link across all of my different kind of primary documents. What I haven't gotten to yet, which eventually I will, is when this document gets too big, I'll need to come up with an archiving strategy, which I'm confident I'll be able to deal with probably in a day or two. I'll figure it out and I'll be able to like click one stamp, it will package everything up and archive it off into another Tinderbox file. So that way,
you're gonna find that's
what
fairly difficult.
Not really. Not really. I know how I'm going to do it. It's just I don't have the time nor need to spend the time to do it right now.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I think you have to break out of Tinderbox and use an external script.
No, not really. I don't think so. It depends on it depends on what I want to do for my archive. Is my archive going to be just keeping a record of the document, or is my archive going to be making sure I have all of the cross-linking and dynamic stuff working?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That, and again, I haven't decided which way I want it, but yeah, that's what I've done.
Yeah.
And I'm hopefully this shows you potential and demonstrates, stimulates some creativity for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very much so.
Really fascinating.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well,
right.
Thank you again. And again, I really appreciate you guys being my patrons and supporting my my efforts here. Again, it does not go unnoticed. And if you wouldn't mind, I think this has actually turned out to be a really good session. So maybe we can make this into one of my YouTube videos. Would you guys mind if I publish this?
As long as you don't mind me eating breakfast.
Not at all. Not at all. This is a collaborative community thing. So thank you very much. And again, I think hopefully guys, you'll learn a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, very much.
All right.
And
Thanks,
if you
Michael.
have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay. Great.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.